Good evening, everybody. My name is Angela Grimm, and I'm the Parent Division Chair for Ohio Association for Gifted Children. And thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for our second Google Hangout. We're talking tonight on You Don't Know What You Don't Know, Navigating the World of Gifted Education. We are thrilled to be able to bring this opportunity to families tonight, and we have a great panel with us tonight. We have parents and professionals from across the state who are bringing a great perspective, a wide variety of perspectives, both as parents and educators. And I know when I first had a child who was identified in kindergarten, I know that I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's kind of my famous phrase that I coined, and it was a very overwhelming journey for me. My daughter, I just didn't understand. I didn't know what identification meant. I didn't know what service meant. I didn't know what overexcitabilities were. I didn't know what this journey was. I didn't understand anything about the world of gifted. And I wish somebody could have kind of handed it to me on a silver platter. I started tearing through books. I started tearing through websites. I started trying to understand from educators at school, from educators I knew. I started connecting with organizations, with other parents, everything that I could to try to find out more about the world of gifted. So it's been a great journey. My daughter is now in middle school, and connecting with Ohio Association for Gifted Children has been one of the best things that I've done as a parent. So I wanted to be able to share with you all tonight this opportunity, and the Parent Division felt strongly that we wanted you as parents to have this hangout as a means to ask questions and hopefully find some of the answers to some of the questions and some of the things that you might not know and understand about your own children and your own family and this journey that you guys are on together. So we're going to take an opportunity tonight to answer some of your questions on air. Please feel free to post those on social media. You can post them on our Facebook page. You can post them on your own Twitter account using hashtag OAGC. This is a very interactive session. We are going to jump into the Hangout, but before I do that, I want to just talk briefly about the organization. Ohio Association for Gifted Children has been around for many, many years, and the organization brings a lot to families and professionals throughout the state. The organization is more than just advocacy. Certainly that is a huge piece of what we do. We are about supporting families and students. We want individuals throughout the state to understand how important it is to have gifted education and the right supports for these students, but it is also about providing resources for families and educators. And the Parent Division is a wonderful way for families to connect with each other and for those families to learn from each other. And some of those resources are the Parent Day that we have in the fall. I remember attending my very first Parent Day and meeting Ann Sheldon, who you'll meet tonight virtually through the Hangout, and learning so much, again, about what I didn't know about the world of gifted, and meeting some dynamic speakers, all for $5. That's what Parent Day costs. I also then got to attend the fall conference. I got to connect with professionals and other educators. It's been an outstanding resource for me. It also provides professionals with the Teacher Academy, with Coordinator Division, just an amazing opportunity for professionals throughout the state to have resources, scholarships for students, an art auction. I mean, just there, you name it, there are an amazing amount of resources for families. We also have a quarterly professional publication, the OAGC Review, which provides families with resources. So if you are interested in joining, and I hope you do, I have joined for years now. now, and it has been a wonderful opportunity for me and my family to learn from individuals throughout the state. Please visit oagc.com. There also is a listserv, and again, the social media sites that I mentioned earlier, including the Parent Division's Pinterest page, among other things. So I won't belabor that, but please understand the resource that you all have here in the state that other states don't have. So I want to go ahead and jump into our panel. We have a number of wonderful panelists with us tonight, and I want them to go ahead and take the opportunity to introduce themselves. And I will start with Angie Osborne. Angie?
Hi, I'm Angie Osborne, and I am a gifted coordinator with Marion City Schools in Central Ohio, and I'm also the parent of 2 now grown gifted students.
Ann?
My name is Ann Sheldon, and I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Association for Gifted Children, and I have 3 gifted grown children, so I'm here to tell you I survived it, you can too.
Great. Ann Flick?
I am a gifted instructional specialist with an ESC in Cincinnati, where I am contracted out to teach in a private school, and I also have 2 grown gifted children.
Great. Eric?
Good evening. My name is Eric Hassel, and I am a parent of 3 children at St. John the Baptist School in Crow Township in Cincinnati. I have a 5th grade daughter, a 3rd grade son, and a kindergarten son.
Great. And Laurel?
Hi, I'm Laurel Murphy. I am a Columbus City Schools parent of a 4th grade identified child. I'm also a Columbus City Schools educator. I teach 8th grade in the district for 18 years now.
Wonderful. And Tina?
Hi, I'm Tina Cartwright, and I have 2 kids, a 6th grader and a 9th grader in the Lakota School District in the Cincinnati area in Liberty Township, Ohio.
Wonderful. And Tina just happens to be from my district as well. Tina and I met early on, and I would be remiss if I did not mention my own children. I have 2 kiddos as well. I have my middle schooler, who I mentioned earlier, daughter who's in 7th grade, and my boy who's in 4th grade. So thank you to our panel for being here tonight. And I'm going to start with Ann Sheldon. And Ann, I know we have a little bit of a choppy connection with you, so hopefully we'll get through this together. But Ann, I want you to provide our families, and I know our families tonight are starting out at different points. I know we have some families who are starting out who'd probably just received a letter with the word gifted on it, and we have other families who may be ending, heading towards the end of their journey with kids who are getting ready to graduate from high school. But can you tell us a little bit about an overview of what giftedness is and what the definition is in Ohio, and maybe just a little bit about what some of the mandates are in Ohio?
Sure, I'd be happy to. About how giftedness is defined, and I think this goes right back to the federal level. Because there is no federal mandate for gifted education, each state defines gifted in, 50 different ways. So in Ohio, our definition for gifted services or gifted children is really, it boils down to 4 different categories. And it's generally speaking, children who perform at a higher ability level than their age peers or peers in their specific environment in 4 different areas. The first would be the superior cognitive area. Some people liken this to an IQ. Basically, a child who is identified as superior cognitive is 2 standard deviations above the mean, which is typically around an IQ of 130, give or take a few points for standard measure of error. Then there's the areas of specific academic, and that's typically math, English language, arts, science, and social studies. And to be identified in these areas of specific academic abilities, a student would have to test at a 95th percentile on a nationally normed achievement test. And this is where a good number of our gifted students are identified in Ohio. There are 2 additional categories. One is that of creative thinking ability. These are the kids that just really think outside the box. A lot of people will liken that to visual and performing arts, but it's not necessarily the case. There are many very creatively talented kids also in the sciences and the math. And then finally, there's visual and performing arts, and these are incredibly talented children in music and visual, in visual arts, and so those are typically what we call giftedness in Ohio. In Ohio, unfortunately, we only have a mandate or a law to identify gifted children. We do not have a mandate for districts to require services, which makes it somewhat unfortunate in terms of getting that letter saying your child is identified. Congratulations, but I'm so sorry, we're not going to do anything for them. So that makes it very difficult across the state. And in fact, the majority of gifted children who are identified in Ohio are not provided services.
So that could be very tough for a family, I would imagine. Talk a little bit again for a parent who, I think, especially at a very young age, and might there be some early indicators for families? How would a family know, what would be some early indicators? How might they know that their kid was even gifted?
Yeah, this is often a tough issue to go through. There's no specific checklist that says if your child does this, this, and this, they're identified as gifted, or you should have them tested. But there are some characteristics that are, if not common among gifted children, they're often there at an early age. Young children who are often able to learn at a very fast pace. Children who have a very early verbal ability, or the ability to have some kind of math sense at a very young age. These are some of the characteristics that parents might want to look at to determine, well, maybe we should our child tested for gifted. There are a host of other issues that go well beyond early verbal ability or early math ability, though. There's a certain intensity among gifted children that you might not find with other children. Sometimes gifted children are very energetic. Sometimes they're very focused on a task at hand. Often they're very imaginative. They're very forgetful at times. But I will say for any trait that I can tell you, there will be a gifted children who will have the opposite trait. So as I said, you can't really just look at a checklist to determine these things, but there are some early signs. If I had to kind of generalize, the one thing I think that most gifted children have is a certain level of intensity and a certain level of sensitivity, not just in terms of social emotional issues, but often in terms of some of the physical. I'll tell you how many times I've talked to parent groups, and I'll talk about my oldest child who couldn't stand a hand, or the sock seams touching her feet because they really irritated her. And almost always there will be a parent who will come up to me and say, oh my gosh, my kid is the same way. I thought they were just weird. And they're so relieved to know that there are other children like their own. So there are just these little quirks that go well beyond just intelligence, the whole spectrum of what it means to have a gifted child.
Absolutely, and you said two things that I want to hit on. Number one, you are not alone. I think that's the beauty of connecting with other parents, and I think that's what OAGC, and we're going to talk about local affiliate groups later on in our discussion, but that's the beauty of connecting with other parents and learning from other parents, is that feeling of like, I'm not alone. There is some normalcy to this whole thing, and understanding that. Number two, that what you said about this, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and I wanted to say that from the very beginning, and caution parents a little bit in our discussion tonight, because you know, each of you on the panel, it has a little bit different, or has a lot of it different perspective, and certainly there are a lot of best practices that each of you is bringing to the table. But you know, this is not a one-size-fits-all, and each child is a different human being, and you know, you have to do what is best for each kid. And while we're going to bring some suggestions to the table, you have to listen to your gut, and you have to know what's going to be best for your child. So, Ann Flick, that kind of moves into what one of our next questions. Ann Sheldon just mentioned, you know, some of these overexcitabilities. You know, I think oftentimes there is the perception, and I know I have heard many people say this even to me as a parent, oh, it must be so easy to raise this kid who's this perfect, you know, bright human being. It must be such a cakewalk. I've literally had that thrown at me. Oh, it's such a cakewalk. And I'm like, you know, you know, I love my children more than any other human beings on the face of the earth. Well, I love my husband too. I gotta say that, or I'm gonna get in trouble later. But I think you know, these bright children come with a lot of other concerns, social emotional concerns. There's asynchronous development. There's underachievement. There's a lot of existential depression, mental health concerns. Talk about some of those things that that families might see or need to keep an eye on down the road if their kids are real young now.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that teachers hear too, that we have the easiest kids to teach in the school, but they run us ragged. But yeah, I think Ann pointed out, gave some phenomenal examples of the 5 overexcitabilities, and I think that whole emotional facet of giftedness is kind of what makes this whole child picture something that we need to look at, and something that really falls largely onto the lap of parents, because if these kids are performing at school during the day, they come home to you and yeah, they don't want to wear the shirt with the tag on the back, or I had one who is 20 years old, has gone her whole life and has never worn a button or a snap. So that's sensual overexcitability. There's also the intellectual overexcitability is a little bit more obvious. It's what we think of in terms of the academically gifted students. But then that emotional excitability, where kids can, what some people would say is overreact, but it's the sense that they feel things more deeply than other people, and it can be a challenge for parents to take that energy and help kids make something positive out of that. Sometimes it's excruciating to have a child who cries at the evening news. And then the psychomotor overexcitability is one that I think that often can lead to some misdiagnosis with gifted children. Not that gifted children can't be susceptible to ADHD, but that high energy level that they have just as a tied to their giftedness can kind of get confusing to people who aren't familiar with the different facets. And sometimes parents can even, this is one of those things like Ann was talking about, is you don't have a checklist that's really good when kids are little, but when you figure it out later and you look back on even their infancy, you say, oh, there was a sign. And if you have a kid who never napped as a baby, you know, that tends to be one of those signs, because the psychomotor, they've got that high energy level. And then the imaginational overexcitability, and these can be kids who are very much into the visual and performing arts, but it can even be kids who have like vivid dreams. Just their imaginations are in overdrive. So again, some of these things can pose some challenges, but theory tells us that they're supposed to be rich sources of energy for these children. So as adults, we have the challenge of kind of making them positives for the kids. But I think what you said is key, kind of that asynchrony. That is the essential definition of gifted. That the kid is out of sync in time, that the kid's chronological age doesn't match the age of the student's talent level, be it math talent or artistic talent. So just like we have a student who may be years ahead in math, that student may even be a year or two behind in things like riding a bike, and it can get really frustrating for parents to say, oh, you're so bright, you can you can do amazing algebraic equations and you're only 5. Why can't you tie your shoe? Why can't you clean up your room? So kind of that's one thing to keep in mind, is just that's the whole essence of giftedness, is that they're different age kids all at once. And then some of the aspects that come into that in the classroom then is that we have to watch out for is some of those things, but other things can also affect students who we have cognitive testing that indicates that they're capable of performing at a certain level, but we're not seeing that in the classroom. So it can be a job for educators and parents to work together to tease apart why a child might be underachieving. Is it a motivational issue? Is it maybe some curriculum modification called for? Could it be another diagnosis? So we have students who are twice exceptional, and gifted students are not immune to some of the disabilities that other students have. And while we can't get hard and fast numbers, it seems to be that they kind of follow in the same proportions as typical kids. So we can have a student who's gifted and blind. We can have a student who's gifted with, as you said, Angela, mental health issues. We can have a student who's gifted with a reading disability. One does not preclude the other. So but it can make it harder to diagnose those kinds of things. So it makes for very interesting parenting, and it makes for very interesting teaching too.
Absolutely. Couple resources for families. Again, if you're new to this part of the journey and not familiar with, there's a book, I'm going to hold it up, although you're probably not going to be able to see with my glare, but Misdiagnosis and Dual Diagnosis of Gifted Children and Adults is a great resource for families talking about ADHD, Asperger's, depression, other kinds of disorders. Just a great resource for families. Another one Ann mentioned, and I call my household sometimes the hotbed of intensity. I love the word intensity. I just feel like sometimes we're just all swimming in it. Emotional intensity in gifted students. And then there's another book. I can't find my copy. I jokingly always say my executive functioning gets in the way of me keeping all of these resources at hand. But emotional intensity in gifted students, and then living with intensity is another great resource for families. Kind of talking about then, Ann mentioned, making it kind of challenging then at school. Angie, I want to turn to you for a minute then. It sounds like identification, proper identification, early identification is so critical to these students and to these families to help them understand getting the proper supports in place. Talk through that identification, the screening and assessment. How does that work within school districts? Probably different in public versus private. Can you share a little bit about that process?
Sure. So gifted identification could come either through a referral. A parent can refer a student for possible identification. A teacher could do a referral. Students can refer themselves, and students can also refer other students for testing and assessment. There's also, many districts also will do whole grade screening, where they'll screen everyone at a particular grade level, and that's to kind of try to help catch those students who may not be referred, may not be understood as being gifted, but still allows them to be identified that way. Once a student hits that criteria for gifted identification, they'll receive notice from the school letting them know that their child has been identified as gifted. From there, it really depends on whether or not the school district provides gifted services. As Ann said earlier, in the state of Ohio, gifted services are not mandated. So once a student has been identified, that district, if they are providing services, they will provide you with notification of what those services are, and if your child is eligible for those services, they'll give you something called a written education plan. and that will really outline what that service looks like, the service setting that you can expect for your child, goals for them throughout that school year, who's responsible for monitoring your child's progress toward meeting those goals, and what reporting periods. So some times throughout the year that you can receive an update as to how your child is progressing. So that identification piece is the first step, and then really finding out how your child can be served.
A follow-up question actually just came in on Twitter, Angie. Does the state then require any kind of annual screening? I think the question was that there used to be a requirement to that. Is that still a requirement? And maybe that's a question for Ann or you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take this one. There's never really been a requirement to do whole grade testing, but back in the day, most districts did do whole grade testing, which would result in a much broader child fine. With new gifted operating standards, there might possibly be an opportunity for us to move to a position where there will be whole grade testing required for each district, which would be a huge advantage in terms of more students being identified earlier, and particularly those students who might never be referred, and often those students are the ones who are most disadvantaged. Typically speaking, in Ohio, we do not identify minority and economically disadvantaged students nearly at the level that we should.
So kind of piggybacking off of that then, if a student is identified or perhaps isn't identified, but let's say they do get identified but then they're not getting services, and Angie, let me throw this question to you. What should a family do to try to be proactive in their discussions with a district? I think that's kind of a delicate dance for families sometimes. I think families don't know what to ask for. I think I didn't know early on in my discussions. I had heard the discussion, once identified, always identified, but then I didn't understand what that meant. So how does that play out for a family, and what would be some suggestions that families could follow?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is, as a parent, you really have to learn that you are your child's best advocate, and you have to kind of learn to embrace that role. Going to the school, talking with your child's teacher, finding out, what are the opportunities for your child to do different work. Many times it's students will experience repetitive practice on skills that they've already mastered before they enter that classroom. So having an opportunity to have that discussion with the teacher to find out, are there opportunities for the student to do more challenging work, to do work maybe that better meets their learning style, more hands-on experiences, things like that. And I have a great deal of respect for the classroom teachers that have gifted students in their classroom. The unfortunate part is that many times those classroom teachers don't have the training in the needs of gifted students, and so having that conversation with the teacher, it is a delicate balance. It's something that you don't want to get in the place of telling them how to do their job, but at the same time they may not be aware of some of those special needs that these students have. So just asking the questions, finding out what opportunities there are in the school district. and really becoming an advocate. I hear a lot of times parents say, I don't want to be that parent that rocks the boat with my child's teacher. And you kind of have to be that parent. You are the parent for your child, and it's important that you advocate for them, and find the right way to do that. Outside of the school district, I think, again, obviously organizations like OAGC, helping you become a better advocate, that's a fantastic resource. Just being able to expose your children to new opportunities, whether that's reading books with them, taking them to museums, to summer camps, any kind of experience where they can explore the things that they're passionate about and really be able to challenge themselves intellectually.
Well, and you said a couple things that resonated very strongly with me. One was the different, not more. You're asking for different as a parent, and I've used those words over and over and over. That and the special needs. And I remember, Ann Sheldon, my very first parent day, learning that from you. And that was a real, big aha moment of you don't know what you don't know. I had never really stopped and thought about it being the same, my child being in those same standard deviations. I had worked with adults with disability my whole life, but I had never framed it in that same reality that I had this child that had special needs. And it just, I think it's so important for families to have that understanding, and to your point, Angie, to have that hat and that advocacy. So parents, I'm putting you on the hot seat now, and want to talk to you a little bit about how you've had to approach advocacy. I know that you guys have each probably had some moments where you've had to put on that hat and tried to figure out how to do that dance. So Eric, let me turn to you for a moment. Would you like to share a story with us or a moment with us where you've had to learn how to be a strong advocate for your children?
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. And I really echo so many of the sentiments that Angie just shared. The willingness to be that parent goes a long way on behalf of your children. And I've really got to give credit to my wife, Beth, because she was the one who, on behalf of our kids, was trying to figure out the best strategy for making sure that they were receiving the quality attention and education that they needed. And what we ended up finding is that there were so many other parents who were trying to be that advocate and who had gifted children who are already in the school. And I've really have to acknowledge Ann Flick, who is the gifted specialist at St. John the Baptist, because what we found is not only were we trying to step up and be their advocates, but she was as well. So it really became a team effort where it just took having the right conversations with the right administrators and teachers at the school, and they were able to connect us with others who were in a similar position and had some experience to share, and that made all the difference in the world.
Great. Laurel, would you mind sharing a moment where you've had to step up in an advocacy role?
Oh boy, I've had to kind of step up into advocacy role since day one, and I'm really fortunate. I work in the district where my child attends, and at the end of first grade I get this letter that says your child is blah 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 blah, and I'm like, oh. And I was kind of shocked because I had taught middle school for a long time, and I knew what that looked like in middle school, but for my 6-year-old it was very different. And I went running into the school like, okay, so who's the gifted instruction specialist and who will I talk to? And she kind of looked at me and went, well, we don't serve until 3rd grade. Your child's a 1st grader. And I was like, oh. So I quickly started doing my research and figuring out that she was really not very happy where she was. She wasn't happy in her classroom. She was not in the correct placement, and I had to do a lot of advocating, talking with her principal, asking for help, asking for assistance with other gifted instruction specialists, other parents, until I became very much that parent. And as a teacher, it's funny because I know that parent so well, and I never thought I would become that parent. And I am absolutely that parent. I embrace it at this point because I have to be the one who speaks up for her to get her into the best place and the best situation that she can be in.
And Tina, do you want to share a little bit about your role, your advocacy hat?
Absolutely, and I think what you guys all said earlier is so key. I was fortunate enough to have a wonderful pediatrician. When my son was just about 2 years old, he thought that I should have him tested, and I totally resisted that label. I said, no, it's just because I'm a stay-at-home mom and I work with him a lot. He's not gifted, trust me. Well, he kept asking me every annual checkup if I had him tested yet, and finally he said, you're the parent who came in here when your child was 2 weeks old with a spreadsheet. So I know you're so detail-oriented about your child, and your child is probably going to have special needs. And like you said, Angela, I never thought of it that way, but all of a sudden I realized he has a special need. And if I'm not going to advocate for him, who will? And I think from that moment on, I became my children's best advocate because of that, because I realized that as great as people think it is to have a gifted child, I witnessed things about my child where he does have special needs. And if I didn't advocate for them, I don't think they would be where they are today. So it's so important to take that role on and not to walk it alone, but to look for other parents who have come before you, to help those parents who are coming behind you, because, together we're more powerful in numbers and in knowledge. And I think that's the biggest thing, is realizing that you're not alone in this journey, but that there's so many parents that have walked it before you that have so much knowledge about, what you think you may or may not know.
Absolutely.
And Angela,
absolutely. Go ahead, Eric.
If I could, just to frame for some who might not be aware how far advocacy can go. When Angie mentioned the testing, or perhaps it was Ann Sheldon, we actually had and requested that our two older kids be specifically tested throughout last school year. And it was something that was different and unique for them because they were pulled out of class to take some of the different tests specifically at different parts of the week and the day. And so we even went as far as in talks with the principal and other teachers trying to figure out how the schedule could potentially be changed to accommodate the needs of our older daughter, and trying to fit in the class schedule that really worked for especially language arts and math. And it was a struggle, but what we found is that when other parents got involved and when we were able to get Ann Flick involved, that teamwork is really what made the difference.
Well, I think that's a really great point, Eric. And I was reflecting earlier when Angie was talking, and I meant to say, there's this written education plan, but to Ann Sheldon's earlier point, this is not a federal. This is not a federal plan. This is an Ohio plan. This is not the same thing as an individualized education plan. This is not a federally mandated document, and it is not the same thing as an IEP, and it does not have the teeth and the grit and the power, if you will, as an IEP. And when you talk about the team process, Eric, I think having the power of pulling together the right advocates and the right people together to make things happen for your children, that to me is one of the best things that you can do as a family, is to try to figure out who those inside people are that care, and not that everybody doesn't care about your kid in some way, shape, or form, but there are certain people who really care about your kid and really understand who your kid is and how they are molded and shaped and formed, and you've got to figure out who those people are that are going to help push that rock uphill with you. And I think sometimes, to Tina's point and to your all's point, you can't do that alone, because sometimes it's a systems change, not just something for your own child. So I want to kind of switch gears because we actually have a couple questions coming in. And I also want to remind our audience, if you do have questions, please put them on social media. You can either post them on our Facebook page or post them on Twitter using hashtag OAGC. We'll be sure to answer them on air. We have one question. Actually, we've had it come in multiple different ways, so I think it's important to ask it. And I'm going to throw this to our parents. Actually, I'll throw it to the whole panel. Anybody who wants to answer it. This one's kind of a tough one, but it's talking about, and I think this goes to kind of the overexcitabilities, the intensity, the emotional sensitivity, and quite honestly, the way that a lot of gifted children are molded. They tend to be perfectionists. I think a lot of times it comes from within. But I think it can lead sometimes to children crashing and burning. They set a lot of high expectations, and a lot of times it can deal with a lot of disappointment. A lot of families have a lot of frustrations. Kids can shut down. The dynamics in the home can be very intense. A lot of power struggles. Kids that then sometimes underperform or just there are kids who then drop out. Talk to that. I don't know that we have any panelists here who have kids who have dropped out, although I don't know all of you that well. Maybe we do. But talk through some of that with me. What are some suggestions for families who are dealing with kids who are really strong perfectionists, who are just kind of emotionally shutting down over the fact that when it gets tough, they just want to just say forget it. Anybody want to take that one for me?
I can add something on that, Angela.
Absolutely, Miss Ann. Go ahead.
Something I do both as an educator and a parent, and it comes very easily to me, is modeling my own failures and getting to showing how I deal with those. And this was a learning curve for me too, because I could be very self-deprecating and say, "Oh, Ann, you're so stupid," and "Oh, you're such an idiot." And of course, that's not the right thing to model in front of children. But I think sometimes even in my classroom, I purposely try to work something in, although there are plenty of non-purposeful occasions that I show, okay, I hit a roadblock here, I've got to figure out my way around this. Is there a tool I can use? Is there somebody I can consult with? How can I break this down into smaller parts to get started? You know, how can I brainstorm with other people? So I think showing that we are not perfect can be one really powerful way to get kids to start to see the thought patterns that can be more productive.
I think that's a great point. I also, you know, I am a Girl Scout leader. I've been a Girl Scout leader for 7 years, and one of the things, I have a couple girls in my troop who happen to be gifted and perfectionists. My mantra, my own personal mantra, as I always say, the apple has not necessarily even fallen off the tree. The apple is still clinging to the tree. My own daughter, who is part of the troop, but I'll say done is better than perfect. Like, you know, I think sometimes just, you know, I think there are so many kids who will procrastinate to the point of not even completing tasks, and my challenge to the girls in my troop and to myself is just get it done. You know, try to break things into chunks so things are manageable, and just push to get some task completion instead of, you know, making it so giant and unmanageable. You know, I'll also I will do some role play of what is the worst. You know, we play what is the worst that can happen scenarios. You know, because if the worst that can happen is that you get an F, you know, well, okay, if that is the worst, then in the scheme of life, you know, that is not so bad. So let's try to back up from that and let's talk about what that looks like, you know, and so we play some of that. You know, it's kind of funny. I had one of my very first, I do Google Hangouts professionally, and I had one of my very first Google Hangouts, and I went into my daughter's room afterwards, and I'm like, oh, that was so nerve-wracking. You know how it is when you do a task and it's so crazy. And and she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mom. I was like, oh, I guess well, you know how to manage your stress. Apparently your mother doesn't. So at least I've taught her better coping mechanisms than her mom has. So any other parents or professionals have suggestions for for perfectionists. Anybody else want to add anything to that? All right.
Yeah, I would
Go
like
ahead.
I would
Sure,
like to
Angie.
add just when you're thinking about how you praise your child too, especially when you have a perfectionist, being very specific in the things that you praise and the way that you praise them. I think many times with gifted students, gifted children, you know, you're noticing all of these wonderful things that they're able to do, but being specific with them about what they have done well. You know, I like the way that you've done this. Gives them something that they can latch on to so that they know that's the piece I need to repeat to continue to have success.
Absolutely.
Kind of that generic praise of just saying, you know, you're awesome isn't something that you can really repeat then to continue to enjoy that success long term.
Absolutely. I also think, you know, I have tried to, and I know this gets a little bit overdone, but I try to show my own kids, you know, famous people who have failed and failed and failed and failed. You know, I think looking at some of those examples, you know, makes them see that, you know, you still can be successful, you still can achieve, despite, you know, falling flat on your face, and you still have to get back up the next day and keep moving forward. So I think some of those, and then I shared with the group earlier that book I'm reading. It's called The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed. I mentioned to the panelists I have not yet torn through this, but hopefully it's a good read, and maybe you all can glean something from that as well. So that might be a resource that could be helpful. Okay, well, jumping back to our parent panelists and to Angie. Angie, I just wanted to jump in, and then I want to jump to the parents as a follow-up to this. Can you talk a little bit about acceleration? I think that's one of the pieces of the Ohio gifted standards that is really a model, and a lot of families, I think, don't understand all of those pieces and parts and how to access acceleration in terms of gifted. Can you talk a little bit about what that research is and how a school district uses it and how they determine whether it's even a good option for a student? Can you talk us through that?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're very fortunate in the state of Ohio to have a model acceleration policy. So, you know, the school districts, each school district adopts an acceleration policy. And just to back up a little bit, acceleration in and of itself is, I feel the simplest way to explain it is when you're skipping content. So that could be a case of a whole grade acceleration, you know, where we're taking a student maybe from second grade to fourth grade, so they're skipping an entire year in all subject areas. You have single subject accelerations, so maybe the student stays as a second grader in all areas except one, and for that one area, let's say mathematics, they travel up to the third grade classroom to get their math instruction. We also have early entrance acceleration. So a student who may not meet the age requirements for entering kindergarten or entering first grade, we may place them into kindergarten or first grade earlier than their age peers, and that would also be an acceleration. You know, the process to go through an acceleration really is looking at a variety of factors. You know, I think in the past, many people have experienced many years ago the idea of, well, I have a gut feeling that this student's going to do okay in the next grade level, so we're going to place them there and kind of cross our fingers and hope that it all works out. And it's just not the case anymore. You know, we are looking at a variety of data. We're looking at the child's ability, their achievement, their aptitude, but then we're also looking at some of those social and emotional factors, how they interact with peers, how they interact with adults, their involvement in maybe activities, extracurricular things outside of school that would help kind of ease that transition so that they can maintain some of that social network that they may already have. All of those pieces, factor into that decision, and really, it's not a decision made by one person. It is a committee decision. So once you've gathered all of that data about the child, a committee is convened. That committee is made up of usually the parents, of course, the classroom teacher. If there is a gifted intervention specialist or a gifted coordinator involved, that person would be involved as well. In our district, if there's a change in building that would result from the acceleration, we would invite both the current building principal and the receiving building principal so that everyone can weigh in on those decisions. Their classroom teacher, all of these people. We review the data, we have lengthy conversations, and we try to come to consensus about what we feel is best for that student. The other piece that I think is fantastic in the way that accelerations are handled is we have a transition period for the student. So once a determination is made that we believe acceleration is the right choice for the student, they're placed in that accelerated setting, but for a specified period of time during which we can make any changes to that placement that need to be made, put any supports in place that may help that student be more successful. And in some cases, if we find that it's not a successful placement, we can back out of that at that point. But if we get everything right, which of course is the hope, at the end of that transition period, that acceleration becomes a permanent placement. And at that point, that follows that student throughout the rest of their educational career. So it gives you some power as a parent to know that your child is going to be able to stay in that accelerated placement long term. Should you move, should you change school districts, you have that following your child.
And Angie, because we did whole grade acceleration for our daughter, and we used what was called Nation Empowered at the time, and then there's a follow-up to that called Nation Deceived. My understanding is that acceleration is one of the most studied subject matter in education and one of the most supported in terms of all of that body of research that talks about the positive impact on a child's education and educational outcomes, which I think sometimes is counter to what people dream up in terms of what they envision for, oh, well, that my crazy Uncle Joe who, skipped a grade or, whatever. So, I think, and parents, I think you all may have had some experience with that, both personally for your own kids and maybe even personally for yourselves, if you guys would like to speak to that. Eric, may I start with you, if you would maybe speak to that briefly? I think you're muted, Eric. There we go.
Mute. Thank you. So one of the pieces of advice that I would pass along is to be prepared for the imperfect. As we look back to last summer, it was very possible that we were going to encounter a situation for our daughter that was going to be imperfect. If plans had followed through the way they initially were scheduled to, she would have missed out on some of her extracurriculars and some of the special classes just so that we could have her participate in subject acceleration. Because Beth and I were both very sensitive to the social and emotional aspects of the whole grade acceleration we knew that that just wouldn't be quite what would fit. So subject acceleration ended up being the best option, and we were fortunate that it could work out. But we knew that we had to make a tough decision, and that there were going to be aspects that didn't quite meet our expectations in the short term. And I don't know if there is a significant difference between the decision-making process in the private schools versus the public schools, but being at a smaller school may have made it a little more difficult for us to get the situation to work out from a timing perspective, with the schedules, with the classes, and the teachers being able to accommodate the subject acceleration.
Erica, I'd like to speak to that.
Sure.
Actually, we had a situation where we came from a private school and came to the public school because of subject acceleration. At the private school we were at, they did not have anything but grade acceleration. For me, I was that parent who thought, I already have an August birthday. I really don't want to grade accelerate him. So subject acceleration, when I first found out about it, I was extremely excited. And it has worked great for us. My son is whole grade accelerated in math. And when he got in 6th grade, they decided to do science as well, since math and science go hand in hand. I think the public school, in my opinion, at least here in my experience, they probably just have more experience with it. So for us, it was never even an option in private school to do subject acceleration. But in public school, they had been doing it for years, and it's worked out really great.
And I agree, and I think for us it's been a great decision too. And I think, to Angie's point, it's not an individual decision, it's a team decision. Using the Iowa Acceleration Scale, reading Nation Deceived, and that now Nation Empowered is the new version of that. It put my fears at rest. I was very worried about the social emotional implications. I had a very introverted child, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's only going to exacerbate over time. It's going to be much worse. It hasn't been. She's hit her stride. It's as if she never missed a beat. And when she got brought into the decision-making process in the team, after the team met several times, they said, well, what does she think? And we said, well, we don't know. We didn't bring her into the discussion until we had everybody else's opinions, had the test scores. We didn't want to talk about it with her until we knew it was even an option. And when we talked to her, this was in kindergarten, she said, oh, good, I won't be bored anymore. And we're like, okay, done. That's it. Decision made. I mean, it was, and it has turned out to be the best decision that we have made for her education. But it wasn't an easy decision. It was a laborious decision, and I think, to Eric's point, there's a lot of other variables, I think, that you have to consider. And I think, to Tina's point, you have to, you still have to, kind of continue to, to keep things moving. Speaking of keeping things moving, we have another question coming in from the audience, and I'm not sure if one of our panelists would like to answer this. I'm hoping somebody on the panel could address this issue. Talking about tips for parents of twice exceptional students, both students who would be on an IEP, an individualized education plan, and have gifted education needs. So thoughts for parents who are dealing with that twice exceptional student. Anybody have that in their own household and or professionals that could talk to that a little bit? Angie?
I've had that as a professional. I had a parent, actually my first year as a gifted intervention specialist, had a parent who came to me, and her son was identified as gifted in math and had a reading learning disability. So he had an IEP for his reading. Her concern when she came to me was that we were getting ready to switch to a new math curriculum that was pretty reading intensive. And her concern was that we were impeding his gifted service because of his disability. And had she not brought that specifically to the school district's attention, he would have been, his needs as far as his giftedness would not have been met appropriately. We were able to make some modifications to the math curriculum to ensure that he could still excel as much as possible with the math piece, and still work with an intervention specialist for his reading disability.
I think too, I've talked to a lot of families within our own district, and we're from a fairly large district in Ohio. Advice that I've heard families say is to try to, because, to Ann Sheldon's earlier point that none of the services for gifted are mandated, but all of the services for the IEP, in theory, are mandated. They may not all happen, but at least in theory, they are all supposed to happen. To try to have as many of those needs met for the gifted side, to get as much of that in that IEP as possible. So to have that team discussion in tandem, to have all of those players at the table in tandem, which means that, the gifted intervention specialist, the gifted coordinator, to have the psychologist, to have all of those folks as part of that discussion, to not have separate discussions, because, as this, parent who's posed this question knows, that the giftedness is quite possibly masking a part of the disability and or vice versa. So I think to have everybody there at the table, I think also to then have, if additional supports are needed, additional testing and assessment is needed, to be able to push for that comfortably within the scope of the IEP. As much as possible. And again, it depends on the resources of your district, how much of that is going to be possible, but I think to be able to leverage that IEP as much as you can, knowing that nothing for gifted is mandated. So that's just my 2 cents, not knowing that world as much as I might otherwise. I also know there's a great book, and I don't know the nature of I'm all about the books, but there's a book called Bright Not Broken with a foreword from Temple Grandin about gifted kids with ADHD and autism, and it talks about why twice exceptional children are stuck and how to help them. Just a great, and I've done a quick skim through this. It's a nice read. Might be a nice resource for you. Okay, so we talked a little bit about acceleration. Ann Sheldon, I would love to jump back to you for a minute, ma'am. Can you give families a little bit of an update, a quick update about what's going on at the state level and why families need to be tuned in as to what is going on in Ohio?
Absolutely, I would love to. There's always something going on at the state level that will affect your lives at a very minute level. And for gifted, our biggest issue right now is a rewrite of what's called the Gifted Operating Standard. In Ohio, there are basically 2 types of law. There's Ohio Revised Code, which is passed by legislators, and that's kind of the skeleton of various policies. And then there's something called Ohio Administrative Code, or operating standards, that agencies put together to put the meat on the bones of these policies. All administrative code or operating standards are required to be reviewed every 5 years. And for gifted, our operating standards last set were passed in 2008 and should have been reviewed and passed in 2013. For a wide variety of reasons, those standards did not get reviewed. Well, they were reviewed, but they weren't passed, and we are still working through that rewrite of the standards. Unfortunately, the current draft, and this is before the State Board of Education, completely eliminates all qualities definitions of service. It eliminates all quality definitions for service providers or for who can provide service to gifted children, and it really eliminates most of the measures of quality that just define gifted education as a whole. To be very specific, our current standards are about 14, 15 pages long. The new draft rule or the operating standards would take that down to about 2.5 pages. There's basically nothing there. So why is that important? For parents in a district where there are services being provided, there are some very specific rules about how you can serve gifted children if you are providing those services. And it's important that there are various methods of service that are provided, that there are trained and licensed professionals that provide those services, so that we know that if there is service being provided, it is a real service, not just, oh, a trip to the library or a field trip to, you know, to see a play. Under the new set of standards, a field trip or a trip to the library could actually count as service, which we know is not appropriate. So we're working through these standards at the state board level, and I will tell you, state board members are very divided on this issue. We do have a lot of support, but we have a lot of work to do. So we really need everybody to provide input to those state board members to let them know that it is unacceptable to have very low-level standards for this population. That is our number one issue. There are a couple of other issues. There's a rewrite at the federal level of what used to be called the No Child Left Behind Act. It is what is now called Every Student Succeeds Act, or what they're now saying is ESSA. And there is one glitch that we are worried about, and this is the potential that they will not allow Ohio to get a waiver to eliminate double testing. This occurs with our excellent acceleration policies in the state. Right now, Ohio does not double test kids who are, say, in the 4th grade but are taking algebra, or, you know, in the 6th grade and taking high school level English. They take the test for the subject matter that they are studying at the time, which is appropriate. Right now, we don't really know how the draft of those testing regulations are going to be drafted, but we're very concerned that Ohio will not be able to continue to get these waivers, which are really important, because if you have to double test kids, or if you have to test them with the wrong test, districts will tend to shy away from acceleration, which is, you've heard from past panelists, is a very cost-effective and a very educationally effective way to provide services to gifted kids. And I think the third issue that we're dealing with is some potential changes to what's called College Credit Plus, which used to be called post-secondary enrollment. Some people will call it dual enrollment, which is the ability for students in high school and sometimes in middle school to take courses at colleges and universities. There are a number of different pieces of legislation out there right now really walk things back and impede some of the access that students will have to these programs. So these are the kind of the main issues that we're working with at the state level right now.
So, Ann, one of the questions posed on Twitter, and I think it addresses everything you just talked about, and this particular question is, how can parents advocate for more gifted education teacher training in our schools? So not only that question, but then how can they advocate for all the things you just talked about? So it's contacting, speak to that. What does their level of involvement, in addition to getting involved with the parent division, what are some other specific actions that parents can take with OAGC to, or outside of OAGC, to get involved that would be helpful?
At the state level, and really sometimes at the local level, the best way to help is, number one, to get educated about the issues. That's really easy to do. OAGC has a number of different ways that you can get involved and stay connected with the issues. If you like our Facebook page, if you follow us on Twitter, I usually do update once a week. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks, but it's typically it'll drop on our website on a Friday, and I'm sure Angela will give all of that information somewhere at the end of this this live chat. But there are a number of ways that you can get information from us. At that point, it's really just a matter of reading it and responding. Typically what we ask folks to do is just keep in touch with their legislators. Keep in touch with your administrators who may feel as strongly about the issues as you do. It really is important for people who are parents and are educators that aren't seen as paid lobbyists, employees of this association. It's important for you to have your voices heard so that policymakers understand that it is a real issue that concerns real people at the local level, because all politics are local, and that is a truism that probably occurs across state lines, but it is particularly true for Ohio. Local folks need to get involved.
Okay, so to that point then, that transitions into the idea of local parent groups and local affiliates. OAGC has several local affiliates throughout the state. Some have been in existence for many, many, many years, and some have just started or started again after having taken some years of a short hiatus or longer. One includes the parent group that started in our district, and Tina Cartwright was the founding president of Lakota Leads, and I know that one of the biggest parts about the local affiliate groups is that OAGC is obviously able to help spread the message of advocacy, but again is also able to help parents connect with other parents. It's more about resources and parents sharing information in this journey of giftedness, and I think that's the part that I think people are starting to really understand. And Tina, I want you, if you wouldn't mind sharing just for a minute, why you felt so strongly about Lakota starting the parent group that you started, and I guess it's been about 5 years ago. Can you just talk a little bit about Leads and the journey that you were part of?
Absolutely. I think, it wasn't that we started out to form a parent group. It just kind of happened. We happened to be at Super Saturday, which is a program here locally for gifted children, and we were sitting in a session where they were talking about advocacy. As a result of that, I asked the question, how many parents are here from Lakota? I think at that time it maybe was like 4 people. So we exchanged information, and me being the big advocate that I am, I called a meeting with those parents, and we started sharing stories about our different schools. And what we quickly found out was that there was no consistency across the district. Subject acceleration in my school was something that was offered. However, for other parents, they said they were told that it was not offered. And from there, we just began to look at how could we come together and form a parent group so that we can make sure that what was offered at one school was being offered to all gifted children. And we actually met with then the director of gifted education and decided to form that parent group. We had a great director at the time who had come from a district up by Columbus that had a parent group, so she actually gave us her information. We formed a board. Before long, we had our parent group. We came up with the name Leads at Panera Bread. We just decided to have a conversation, and we were throwing out acronyms, and all of a sudden, Lakota's enrichment and academic development of students came up, and we thought, oh, great, Lakota Leads. We had our first session. I think you were at one of those early sessions, Angela, and I started roping people in. I started asking, what skills do you have? You mentioned that you could do some web. I said, great, we need a website. And we started just getting anyone we could involved, and before you knew it, Leads was formed, and we were on our way. After about 2 years of serving as president, I then needed someone to replace me, and I twisted Angela's arm really, really, really hard and said, in order for this to continue, you have to do it. We need parents to continue to do this. And I'm happy to say we're now on our third president, and Lee's is continuing. I think the biggest learning for me is that there are parents that came before you. There are parents that are going to come after you. And it's so important to share what you have learned with them and so that it can continue. I think our district is better because of it.
I think our district is better because of it, and I think individual families are better because of it, and I think that's what's so wonderful about this journey. I also think, again, finding resources from one another. So I want our panelists tonight to take a moment and think about a gifted resource that you all have tapped into as a family. And Laurel, I'm going to start with you. Something that you have found that has worked really well for your family, whether it's been, and I know this sounds silly, but whether it's been, you know, something online or a game or an enrichment program or something in the state, whether it's a book. I know I keep holding up my silly books, but something that you think has worked really well that you would like to share with families tonight.
The two things that I think really have been the most beneficial to us, one is being able to tap into resources in my school district. As I'm listening to this, I'm realizing how truly good I have it in Columbus City Schools. They did the identification. They've offered so many services, and our specialists are amazing. And even still, it still feels like an uphill battle because I don't necessarily know all the answers with this child. So being able to tap into that resource has been huge. Being able to pick the brains of other gifted intervention specialists in my district who can help. The other thing is we have an actual gifted school in our district. This is our first year. It's our inaugural year. I had initially no intention of sending my daughter there. I was going to keep her in the neighborhood school where she was comfortable, because I was so worried about that emotional sensitivity piece with her. And the stability piece. And a few weeks into the school year, it became really, really obvious that I'd made the wrong decision. My child was bored. She was unhappy. Her two best friends were in her class, and she was still asking me to leave. So we involved her in the decision-making process and moved her down to the gifted school, and she has so much. She's grown so much just from that experience. She's where she needs to be. Her needs are being met. She's so well-adjusted. Her transition was seamless. It was like this is where she was meant to be, and that has been the most amazing gift to our family because she's got access to so many gifted specialists and people who understand her social emotional needs and her academic needs and all of the different excitabilities and all the different pieces of that.
That is fabulous. Wonderful. Tina, a resource that you would want to share with families?
Sure. I think the biggest resource for me has been the Super Saturday program here in Cincinnati. When my child was first identified, I learned about that program, and when I walked in, I felt at home. He felt at home. All of a sudden, there were parents in the parent room that was sharing their story, and I didn't feel like I was alone. My child walked into a classroom with all these kids who were doing science projects, and he was running around, and I thought, wow, there's 10 of him in this class. I mean, it's just a fabulous program. My nephew, who is 7 years old, was recently identified, and I told my sister, sign him up for Super Saturday. You won't regret it. So usually if there is a parent and I'm talking to them and they live in the Cincinnati area, I'm like, start with Super Saturday. It's a great resource.
Awesome. Eric, what about you? We'll have to unmute you, Eric.
Oh, dang.
There we go.
Twice in a row. I will say two words, Ann Flick, in regards to the best resource. I jokingly said in the chat that I was going to try to say Ann's name 20 more times, but it's actually the truth. My wife and Ann have talked on countless occasions, and it all goes back to the advocate and the teamwork aspect that we have been very blessed and fortunate to have so many resources within our school. And I must say that at St. John's, everything has worked out very well for us. But it wouldn't have worked out as well if we didn't extend out of our comfort zone and take the time and the effort to find those who are able and willing to help. And it's even to the point where 2 weeks ago, my kindergartner finished a puzzle, and he said, "Oh, we got to tell Mrs. Flick I finished this puzzle. She'll be pretty excited, right?" So he's already looking forward to learning more and taking advantage of those resources.
That's great. That's great. Ann, what about you? Ann Flick, you've been there as a parent. What are some great resources and/or as an educator sharing with families?
You know, if you let me slip in two, it's hard for me to narrow down. But I think as a parent,
rule breaker.
I felt like I got the most information from other parents. And this is such a statistically rare population that it can be hard to connect with other parents, especially if you're not in a major metropolitan area. All of us are lucky enough to be in. So we do resort to online things, but the online communication, the online networking for parents of gifted children is really phenomenal in this day and age. It's a whole lot different from when my now 24-year-old was young. So first, of course, and foremost is Ohio Gift, the Ohio Association for Gifted Children's listserv, that even though we all should be members of the Ohio Association for Gifted Children, and there are a lot of benefits that go along with that, you can sign up for that before you go to bed tonight and be on the listserv, and people put questions out there and get responses. It's where educators and parents come together. And we even have college professors on there. Ann is on there, so you can throw out a concern, an idea, and find out how somebody else has solved that issue somewhere else across the state. But the big one that I think I hesitate to mention, because when I first talk to a group of parents, I don't like to mention this one because it is so huge and so mammoth and so extensive, because we do have this amazing body of research, and there is a lot of research and solid information behind gifted education and how to serve gifted children, that this storehouse, this warehouse, this database of all things gifted is so extensive, you can get lost in it. It feels like a black hole. So it's not it's not for the faint of heart, because once you get in there, it may take you a couple days to come out. But Hoagie's Gifted, H-O-A-G-I-E.
That was going to be the one yes. Not, it's just like the sandwich. No, I was going to say the same thing. I agree. It is not for the faint of heart, but I agree.
So I would say acceleration is where I first found it, with questions about acceleration, but I would say go to Hoagie's, and they have a list there. This is one person, by the way, who has spearheaded this effort for a decade plus now. She does this all individually on her own, but it is our storehouse of information for gifted children. But you can go there and go into her search bar there and do online networks, and there are other national networks that you can find to connect with other parents to find out how they are getting their children's needs met.
Great. And Ann Sheldon, what about you? A resource to share besides OAGC?
You know, I'm just looking over at my bookcase. I probably have 100 gifted books that I've gone through. So it's really difficult to choose just one. If I had just one, it would probably be Guiding the Gifted Child, which was a phenomenal resource to me when I was first going down this path as a parent. And I will just tell you, as I was reading it, at times I would just burst out into tears, because all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There are others out there who are trying to deal with this thing called giftedness. I will echo the comments of some of the other panelists. Parent resources, just someone to talk to when you've got nobody else. I mean, those things are very important. I was the president of our local affiliate so many years ago, I don't even want to tell you. And I am still great friends with some of those folks. We still are in touch, and we still share information about our grown children. Because I told you at the beginning that my children are grown and that you'll get through this. I don't tell you that the gifted adults are difficult as well So you will have to look forward to.
I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't be laughing so hard because I'm going to be there in a couple of years.
You shouldn't laugh that hard because it's difficult. And I do want to say one thing. For me personally, right now, my greatest resource are some of the board members on the OAGC governing board. We have a phenomenal group of people who are working for gifted children outside of their regular jobs. They put in tremendous numbers of hours, a tremendous amount of work. They do just amazing things, and I don't know everything, but I know who to find that will give me that answer, and most often it is somebody on our board. We have a great resource with just the folks on the OAGC governing board.
Awesome. Well, Miss Angie, what about you? A resource to share?
I'm going to take Ann Flick's lead on this, and I'm going to give you two. The first has been mentioned already, which is A Nation Deceived. When that resource first came out, and it is free. It is a free publication. You can download it today as a PDF. I downloaded that and sent it to our print center and made bound copies that I hand to every parent. It truly, dispels those myths that we've all heard about acceleration, and really gives you, empowers you to be able to move forward with that. The other resource that I would say, and I'm sure Ann has it on her bookshelf there, and Angela, maybe you've got it ready to hold up, is a gifted child's survival guide. And to me, that was one of those things that I read it and I felt like I had experienced some of those things, knew that my own children were experiencing some of those things, and again, it was just one of those resources that lets you know that you're not alone.
That's great. Gosh, I don't know. You guys you've all taken what I would say. I think saying for me, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, I tuned into some seminars early on and pulled together just some other families to sit and listen. It's interesting. Somebody even mentioned, I think it gives insight to who you are even as an adult, some of your own little idiosyncrasies and overexcitabilities and quirks and all of those fun things too. So I think that's been a good, but mostly just the other parents. That has been my number one resource. So with that, I'm going to bring tonight to a close. We've actually had a couple questions we haven't been able to get to. Hopefully we'll be able to send you some answers off air. If not, feel free always to email me. My email address is on the OAGC website. You can contact me that way. The website is oagc.com, easy enough to remember. And to Ann's earlier point, please connect with the listserv. It's a great source of information and it costs you nothing. But I also hope that you will consider joining the Parent Division, because it's a great opportunity to connect with other families and begin to understand more about this journey as you go. Follow our social media, our Facebook page, our Twitter, our Pinterest page. You can find all of those links and all of that information also on our website at oagc.com. This session will also be available. It'll be recorded at the same YouTube link that you got in to watch the hangout tonight. So that should be easy enough, and that link will also be available on our website. Thank you to our families. Thank you to our professionals who helped promote this to our families and get it in their hands. For those of you who are starting out, we know that this can be a little rough. it can be a little overwhelming because you don't know what you don't know. And for those of you who have been around for a while, we know that you have weathered the storm, and to Ann's point, still have children who are turning into adults to deal with. But there is support. We are here for each other. So thank you to our panelists. I very much appreciate you all being here tonight. And with that, I bid everyone a good night, and thank you so much.